All righty, y'all. It's getting close. Tech Talk Tuesday. Hey, Sam and Jackie. I'm at the shop by myself again. Hi, John and Brad. I got some interesting stuff to talk about today that's often misunderstood or just ignored because we only measure what we know. We only look at what we look at. We only see what we see. Hey, Ron, Scott, Jimmy, Lee. And a lot of people take it personal and take offense to my directness sometimes, and I'm really sorry because I really feel like I'm not, I might be abrasive to some people, but sometimes the truth isn't all that great. And my grandmama used to tell me all the time, you can get more with sugar than you can with you-know-what. So I'm not spicing this up. I'm not sugarcoating this. These are just things that I think I know. Hey, John and Brad and Raymond. God bless y'all, brothers. I appreciate y'all checking in. There's a lot of opinion out here, Charlie, Brandon. It's a lot of good info and a lot of so-so info. But look, first thing, standard operating procedure here is these are my opinions. And I love the Farmers commercial, I think it is, where I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. Well, these pistons are made out of 2618 alloy, and I know a lot about them because I have a vapor trail about 6 miles long made out of molten alloy, piston alloy. So I'm a 2618 guy. Anyway, I appreciate you guys, Scott, Nicholas, Jeff. I'm going to try and focus on my job at hand here rather than the comments, which is a challenge for me because I try to see everything, and people ask me questions and look, Terry, Barry, see how that goes, Aaron. But I want to try and stay on point, and I got some things I want to cover today. A few subjects are big bore kits. And listen, you guys that have car engines and you build motorcycle engines and 4 cylinders, 2 cylinders, 1 cylinders, go-karts, engine guys, listen to me. This is about you. This isn't about a Harley. This isn't about a Chevrolet or Ford or Chrysler. I'm very thankful and fortunate that I've worked in all of those venues over my years, and I've learned a lot. And what I have today in 2020 is 40 years of experience that will transcend to almost every engine. I'm not a 2-stroke guy, but I could probably help a little bit with the concept of suck, squeeze, bang, blow on a 4-stroke. And that's not sugar-coated, man. The engine goes 180 degrees on a 4-stroke, and it sucks. Well, it actually opens up and let the atmosphere push the air and fuel in, and then the piston goes back up and squeezes it as tight as it can. The spark plug lights it and then goes bang, and it rotates the crank for the piston to go back down. And then the exhaust valve opens and the piston goes back up and pushes it out. That's the 4 strokes, and I call it suck, squeeze, bang, blow. It's just easy for me to remember saying it that way. And hey, John and Steve and Philip. But 2618 alloy is, I think the other alloy that was used in forged pistons was 4032. That's what sticks in my mind. I could be wrong. You guys can correct me on that. Wiseco's go-to alloy forever was, I think, 4032. I think that's the number. I might be wrong. Some of you guys are really savvy on materials and heat treat and stuff, and I'm not. But I do know that you can take a brittle piston that is really, really hard and drop it, and it will shatter. You can take one of these 2618 alloys, and they're very malleable. This thing, if you drop it or throw it on the floor, it will dent. It will bend. It's a malleable part. That makes the ring lands very, very durable so that we can bend it and twist it and shape it and make it into stuff that the piston designer would cringe if he knew what we were doing. And like I said, good grief, you would not believe how many pistons I've been through in my day. And I didn't know what I know today. All you guys, listen, all of you. Brian, I see Brian's, his profile picture just popped up. Brian, I know you, but that ain't you in that profile picture. That is the most beautiful pair of blue eyes I ever saw pop up in your profile. I hate to interrupt and say that, but if y'all know Brian Kramer, you know what I'm talking about. David, Timothy, Steve. Hey, thanks y'all again. Remember, while I'm talking, this is my opinion. And I'm not intending on stepping on anybody's toes, but I have my own opinion of how this ought to be. And if I was to start from scratch, I would do things a lot different. I've been very fortunate in my career to start from scratch, clean sheet of paper on Pro Stock 4-cylinders and Pro Stock 2-cylinders. And I've had a lot of involvement in the V8 stuff through the years, and it's all so intertwined and connected that you would be shocked. Valve train technology, piston ring technology, bore and honing, connecting rods, strokes, ratios, all the comparisons, all the math is exactly the same, and every little piece of engine has has its own particular, personality that needs a little touching up. It can't be exactly the same. But what's really frustrating for me is the guys that are so good in our industry and our industries and our sport, that are so good in their own genre, in their own field, and they are the expert. They are the award winners, the engine builders of the year, the guys that get the trophies. These guys, some of them are so hard to talk to because they know what they know and they're so proud of it. And some people they think that if they share anything that they're going to lose their job or they're going to lose their edge or whatever. But in my career, I found that when I share, I learn. And when I learn, I share. And it's really served me well. We've been very successful by sharing information to people and also figuring out a way to try and sell it, turn it into a job. Because I've been retired for a long, long time, and I just work on hot rod racing engines and stuff for my hobby, and I've been able to pay my bills all these years, which I'm very thankful for that. But I want to tell you about the guys that are the experts. When I offer advice or they ask me a question, so many times, you guys, I hear, yeah, but George, it's not a motorcycle. George, it's not a pro stock motorcycle. Yeah, but George. I'm like, okay, well, why did you ask me? Because I wasn't trying to make you run a pro stock motorcycle. I wasn't trying to make you run a motorcycle. I wasn't offering my experience or my advice to help your motorcycle run if you race a car, or for you to help your Suzuki if you race a Harley. If you have an engine question, I'm really good with that stuff because I've done it for so long. I mean, there's some guys out there that have done it longer than me, but I'm in the top 10 of not the best or the smartest, but I'm in the top 10 of how long the duration of my career with the passion I have has been peaked to where it's unbelievable. My oil lights flickering and my shift lights blinking, and I've been like that for years and years and years, and it's a miracle that I haven't nosed over yet because of how passionate I am about it. And it really drives me to talk to you guys about it and share this stuff. But and it's sad. Sometimes our only limits are really what we want to know or what we want to hear. And if you don't want to hear something's different than the way you do it, or you're not interested in learning something different than the way you're doing it, it's probably a good time for you to go watch the Fox News or CNN or something. But right here, if you want to know my opinion on some engine stuff, this is where it's at. Just my opinion, not the truth, not the gospel, just what I think I know. Say that back to me. It's just what I think I know. Now, engine builders are not the same as engine assemblers, okay? There's thousands and thousands of guys that can build really nice V8 engines. There's thousands of guys that can build Harleys and Suzuki engines. And they're the enthusiasts out there that do it, and they can't understand why you would pay somebody, an engine builder, for special stuff or special work or something, because they can do it. A tech, a factory recognized tech, not all of them, but some of them, and this is just an opinion now, please don't take this personal, because there are some of the best mechanics I've ever seen are factory techs, factory trained tech or technical school trained tech. And if you can't start where I did when you're 14 or 15 years old and keep on it for 40 or 50 years, then you have to go to a tech school and get the basics. Or you got to dive in full speed head first like I did and make all the mistakes. And I didn't have anybody to pay my way out when I made the mistakes. I just had to blow it up, fix it, blow it up, fix it, and try and understand why. And I was so hard-headed, I blew it up probably more than anybody. So anyway, the guys that read the manual and torque all the parts down and measure the clearances with a range, they have a factory tolerance. Like your run out on your crank can be like 4 to 12. on a Harley manual or something. I don't know that number. I'm just playing off the top of my head. I know that my engines would hate to have a lot of run out like that. And the measurement is done in a static state when you've got the engine, got the crank in the cases, and you're spinning it over with a really nice tool that we've got here that I guess David Laudermilk made it at he does that kind of stuff. And and I think Jim's has one. There's a couple of guys sell them that you can bolt right onto your cam chest on a Harley and check your crank run out. Now, please understand that is only pinion shaft run out. That is not the crankshaft run out. That is the pinion shaft run out. The rest of the crank is flopping around in there too because it's made out of 5 pieces or 3 pieces or 4 pieces, and they're all pressed together and they're all welded together. And that stuff, if you think it's like that when you're going 8,000 RPM at 200 horsepower or 5,500 with 200 foot-pounds of torque with all the spray and the nitrous and the turbos and the superchargers turned on, you think that crankshaft's running true, I'm sorry, you're mistaken. That thing is trying to come apart. It flexes. I'm going to use my hands. This is what the flywheels look like when it's running. It flexes like that. And then people want to know why something breaks. If you were a rod pin in a Harley and you did this all day long, eventually the rod pin's going to break. Well, the rod pin's the rods are slipped onto that pin, and when that pin breaks, darn, it's going to tear up everything. So we have to keep that kind of stuff in mind. So that introduces me to wrist pins. All right, wrist pins. When I started racing, we used super thin wall pins because they were lighter. I bought a gram scale, and I could measure this pin was lighter than the other pins. So I said, it's light. I got to use it. So I got me some really light pins. And then every engine I built for probably a decade, I used the lightest pins I could get. And then when I got into the Harley racing deal, this was a factory S&S racing wrist pin. It's thin wall, very good material. You can make this out of 300 kryptonite or unobtainium 400. And if you make it this thin, I'm sorry, you have a noodle. This is a rubber noodle. Get it to the right speed and get it into the right places, and this becomes a rubber wiggler. Now, I'm going to draw a little picture right here. Wrist pin has a terrible life. Here's a connecting rod, and here's a piston. And this wrist pin goes through here. Can y'all see that? And what I'm talking about is goes right through here. Connecting rod slips on here. This slides through. And when you turn this thing and make a lot of power, I want you to know the piston, when it's firing and it's got all the torque on it, it is compressing the wrist pin, it is compressing the rod, and it is trying to shorten the engine when it's firing. And when you got detonation or right after detonation, but look, most of the stuff blows up on what I call extension. That's when both valves are open on overlap, and this piston is trying to come off the rod, and this wrist pin is held on by the rod. So I guess prudent thinking would think if you had a lighter wrist pin and you had a lighter piston, your connecting rod would be stronger because it would have less tension pulling it apart. Did you know that when you're going 7,000 RPM on your engine, did you know that the piston comes to a dead stop at the bottom? I mean, stop, cold. I don't care if you're going 5,000, 3,000, 10,000, the piston stops dead in its tracks. Even when the tachometer says 10,000, piston stops cold. And then it starts over and goes up. And when it gets to the top, it stops. And when it goes to the bottom, it stops. That's the only way it can go. It goes up and down, 150 times a second. The wrist pin is hanging on for dear life. The rod is trying to pull the pin out of the piston. The piston's trying to shove the wrist pin off the rod. And at high RPM, when both intake valves are open, the exhaust valves open, the piston's trying to come off. Piston's trying to come off. And when it does, it bends this wrist pin. So now this wrist pin looks like this at TDC on overlap. That's how the wrist pin looks when the piston's trying to come off. When it's under load at max torque, max power, the wrist pin bends the other way. So it's going like this. It's going Smile, frown, smile, frown, smile, frown, smile, frown. That's how it runs the whole time. And eventually, that son of a gun's going to snap. And it doesn't usually snap in the middle. It usually snaps in this uncovered area. And one more thing that's really important about the wrist pin that I would love to share with you is these thin wall pins. This is something that a lot of folks don't know, and we're learning every day, is the tapered pin. This is what the outside looks like. This would be the interior cross section. And that's what the material looks like. And it's tapered. Everybody's seen one. Here is a titanium tapered wrist pin. This pin is titanium, DLC coated, and it has steel ends caps on it so that the circlip won't wear the titanium out. Now this is a complicated piece right here. We ran these in the Pro Stocker till we started flexing these like rubber. But see, it looks thick, DLC coated, doesn't wear. But when you explode the piston off of this, the piston just explodes. And the reason it is because this will not stay round where it's tapered. It won't stay round because it's bending. And when a tube bends, it goes oval. And we build these, and you build yours probably with 1/1000th clearance between the piston and the pin. There's about 0.001 pin bore clearance. And if you got 1/1000 clearance and you got a thin wrist pin and it bends, it is now shaped oval. And when it's shaped oval, it gets clearance here and here, and it pinches off the clearance on the sides, and there's no oil. And then the oil gets gone, and then you have an outer round part in a round hole, and it's trying to sling it off, and all of a sudden it seizes up or explodes off. In my Pro Stock car, when I first started back in 92, 93, 94, I was running the 500-inch Oldsmobile stuff, and we had really nice wrist pins. We had them built out of some kind of tool steel, 300, Miraging, some kind of agents, and 350. I don't even remember all that stuff because I'm not a materials guy, but the wrist pins were so light, and I had the pistons all milled out. Here's an old Suzuki Pro Stock piston that I cut apart, and I wanted to show you the mentality we had. When in doubt, mill it out. This is still heavy because we didn't cut this part out. But can you imagine looking at this, how that would stay together at 14,000 RPM? And if you can look close enough, these wrist pin boards burned up because the ends of the wrist pin were going out around when it would bend. And the piston would literally explode off of it. Now, on my Pro Stock car, I had super thin pins, 8 of them, and super thin, lightweight pistons. And I was running it at Rockingham one day, and the broke a wrist pin, exploded the piston off the wrist pin. No, I didn't break a wrist pin. I broke the piston couldn't stay on an oval-shaped tube. This piston right here, even though it's really strong and good stuff, it won't stay on this if this is out of round. It won't stay on here. So if you've got a wrist pin's going like this when it's running, and you got a piston that's hanging onto it for dear life, eventually it's going to blow, it's going to oval and explode. We've all seen them. If you race long as I have, you've seen these crack. You've seen these pin bosses crack. You've seen them crack through here. You've seen them crack through here. That's because the wrist pin is flexing so much that it's trying to break this boss off the piston. What does that have to do with you? Well, I guess at the end of the day, we need a thick wrist pin. We need 220 wall, 200 wall. We need a heavy wrist pin because the wrist pin connects the piston to the connecting rod. And the piston takes all the pressure that we generate with spending all the money for titanium valves and big valves, oversized valves, port work, big throttle bodies, exhaust pipes. And we spend all that money to get here to push this down. And if your wrist pin is light, just because you got a gram scale and you want to weigh it, and your wrist pin's flexing and flexing and flexing, this right here is going to bend these ringlands, and this piston will end up being, you guys aren't old enough to remember the oil can, but we used to have these oil cans, and we used to push with our thumb to make the oil come out. And it used to go dunk, 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 dunk. These pistons literally oil can when they're running. The top of the piston goes like this. Wrist pin's going like this. And eventually that stuff's going to give up. So a substantial piston to keep the pressure on top of it, and a substantial wrist pin to keep the piston connected to the rod will give you more horsepower at the end of the day, and it will last longer. I tell people all the time that there's some words that are really weird, like our engines, our street engines, like for our Harleys our hot rod Harleys. Most guys that are watching want some kind of hot rod. We want if we have some kind of car, we want to soup it up. If we have a motorcycle, we want to soup it up. If you don't feel that way, you're probably on the wrong channel, man. This is Tech Talk about hot rods. Let me get a sip here. So we have to use a stout wrist pin. There's a DLC coated, heavy duty. This pin will stay round until we get it over revved. And I'm reading on the internet about the guys on the internet that say that using a vacuum pump, which we don't use those on Harleys, but Scar guys and Pro Stock guys all use vacuum pumps, but we pull crankcase vacuum to keep the ring sealed to the piston at high RPM. Well, that's going to be a great Tech Talk for another Tuesday, but I want to tell you one thing that happened at the same time in my career, in my engine building career in the 80s. We discovered vacuum pumps. It's about the same time we were exploring the lightweight wrist pins and lightweight pistons, and we burned up some wrist pins. We exploded some pistons, and in the first few years, we blamed it on the vacuum pump. We said, oh, look, there's no oil pressure. Well, that's just a misunderstanding. If one day you'll catch on to that and you'll say, wow, I really thought that if I had 20 inches of vacuum that my wrist pins are starving because of it. But here's what happened. It was parallel technology where the lightweight wrist pins came through their phase and came in and went out at the same time the vacuum pumps came in. So people are like, well, you can't run that much vacuum because your wrist pins will starve. No, that's not it. That doesn't have anything to do with it. Get you some wrist pins in there that will live. It doesn't matter. They'll stay round. They'll keep a 1 thou clearance, and the vacuum pump will not pull that oil pressure away from the wrist pin. I'm sorry, it's not happening that way. Yes, if you have an oil pressure gauge that's referenced to the atmosphere, and you pull 50 pounds of oil pressure, it looks like you have no oil pressure, but that's referenced to inside the pan where the vacuum is. So I'm telling you, that's too long to talk about right now, but you can look it up and read about it. Yeah, look at the wrist pin on a Cummins. That's a great point. Another thing I've noticed is we've seen this come through in our career lately. Not in our career, but in recent times, we've seen the diesel and the new Harleys come with this TP rod. The small end of the rod looks like this, and the wrist pin comes through here. The reason that's like this is because we have not pulled the top off of a rod on a Harley yet. If you have, something's wrong. But when you blow up a crank on a Harley, you hardly ever see one open up the small end. When I say open up the small end, I'm saying the rod looks like this. We broke them down here, we broke them in the middle, we broke them here, but we have not pulled the top off of one. So what a man can do, or a company can do, is reduce this material up here because it's unnecessary excess material. Down here, you got to have double the footprint because when you go this way, like on a diesel, the diesel's running in detonation almost all the time. So major load goes here, but a diesel doesn't rev up very high, nor does a Harley, so therefore this is a little wasted material. The top of the rod, this top part, doesn't have to be as stout as this bottom part. That's interesting to me as we learned that and uncovered it. I'm going to leave this right here for you guys to look at how ridiculous this. When in doubt, mill it out. Okay. Big bore kits. There are big bore kits for sale on the internet. There's big bore kits for sale all over. And when I say big bore, I'm not talking about a 107 or 114, a stage 3, a stage 4. I'm not talking about an S&S 128, 124. Now I see that the motor company has a 131 for the Milwaukee 8s. These are bolt-together kits. They are sourced out. They are engineered out where the average Harley mechanic tech guy can assemble it without any problems. You don't have to measure anything. You don't have to measure deck height. You don't have to measure piston to wall clearance. You don't have to measure gasket thickness. This thing is so worked out that a Harley dealer, a guy in a Harley store, can get this kit off the shelf, bolted on, and you can download a map off from Harley into that Milwaukee 8, and it will be tuned up pretty darn nice if you follow the rules. Go by the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s of the instruction manual. I'm talking about way bigger than that. I'm talking about pistons that are so big and cylinders that are so big that we have to notch. We have to notch here, okay? And the reason we have to notch here might not be, I mean, a lot of guys that build engines and work on hot rod Harleys, they know that we notch cylinders here, because I'm going to try and get it on camera. Let me try. I'm not saying I can. The pistons are so big, the cylinders have to go together like this. Can you see that? And if you're savvy, you'll say to yourself, all right, my phone just jumped out on me. If you're savvy, you'll say, well, what about the pistons? Yeah, great question. Here's a 143 piston kit from S&S for a 123 twin cam. Look at these notches. V8 guys would have a duck if they had to deal with this, and I'm not talking about Donald. But look at this. You'd have to have like a 6-inch bore in a V8 for these to come together. All right? And I'm going to try and move these. Let me get this out. I'm going to try and move these when they go, because this is how the Harley runs. That's about the best I can do. But they get together and clank. So if you don't clearance them right here, they're going to clank. Does that help ring seal? Does that help blow-by issues? Heck no. You just added way more to the story. So we can't sell big bore kits, internet, to people that don't check that kind of stuff, because we hand fit these cylinders to where they clear perfectly. We hand cut the pistons until we get them just right, but we order the pistons like this one right here. This is another example, okay? But the front piston's notched and the back piston's not. The rear piston's notched. There it goes, my bad. The rear piston's notched and the front's not. This is how our kit goes together. Now that's going to cause some confusion, but the reason is, and I'll try and draw a picture of it, is the engine is turning this direction. Here's the flywheel, and we're going in this direction, okay? The front cylinder, we'll try and draw this. Front cylinder's here, and I know I didn't do that good in art, but when this piston's going down and the crank pin's here and the wrist pin's here, this piston here is catching major thrust on the back skirt. This is the minor thrust, this is the major thrust. On the rear, when the crank gets here, and the piston's here, the major thrust is going to the rear of the piston. So, this is the front of the rear piston, where it hits the it hits the rear of the front piston, and the front of the rear piston hits the rear of the front piston. Woo! Let's try that one more time. The front of the rear piston hits the rear of the front piston, and the rear of the front piston hits the front of the rear piston. I don't know if I said that right, but anyway, because on the front piston, the major thrust is on the back, we don't notch it, because all the stress is over here compared to the rear piston. The major thrust is on the rear, and the minor thrust is on the front. The minor thrust is for keep the piston straight, keep the rings in line. The major thrust is for where all the pressure goes to the back, because it's trying to shove the wrist pin out the back of the block as the crank goes this way. The front's trying to shove the wrist pin out of the back of the block as the crank's going this way. So on a V-twin, and a V8. Looking at the V8, this would be the harmonic balancer, and this would be the left bank, and this is the right bank. This is driver's side, passenger side, and the crank's rotating this way. All the major thrusts are on the lifter bank on the driver's side, and all the major thrust is on the exhaust side on the passenger bank. And that's just information that's usually not discussed. Serious engine guys know that stuff, and I'm out of time. Darn, I was going good here. I just happened to look at the clock, and I'm out of time. I got more to go. Hey, if you want to see the rest of the story, or you want to hear some more info kind of like this, please email me, text me, and check out this. I got to go with this hybrid light. I love this thing, man. This got the brightest light I ever saw. It never goes dead. It's called a hybrid light. And you can charge it in the wall. You can charge your cell phone on it. And it has light charger, not just solar, but light. Charges it up, and has a cell phone jack on it too. So pretty neat little piece. It's interesting. I think it's a pretty new product, but I think it'll take over the racing world pretty soon. This would be wonderful to have in the bag of your bagger or in the glove box of your pickup, because this thing here does the business. I love y'all. Thanks for watching, man. Look after each other. Take care of everybody. And we're going Hogs Gone Wild bagger racing in a week. Everybody stay tuned. Watch me on Facebook. Check out the Star Power page also. And I'm on Instagram. And praying for Ryan. Number 6 car last night. Big wreck. Looks like he might make it, but it's going to be a tough road. That was an unbelievable crash. I don't think we've lost anybody since Dale Earnhardt was killed. It's the second time I've ever seen the black curtains come out. It gave me a real creepy feeling for a little while. And I just wanted to say, let's pray for Ryan Newman and his family. And he's a great ambassador for racing. And I know all of you aren't NASCAR fans or drag racing fans, but we're all people fans and hot rod fans and gearhead fans. Okay, remember that. Love y'all. May God bless. Bye.